Hi, welcome family. Welcome for those that are new to this channel. Welcome. My name is Celivette Guerra. For those that have been following along, thank you for being here once again. Today I wanted to dive deep and just share with you guys a little bit of my experience, what I'm going through right now, as we have a little conversation regarding what God has delivered us from. That part of us that some might look as the season of our life where we lived in a shadow, where we lived in a moment of darkness, that side of us that can bring a sense of guilt, a sense of shame, a sense of embarrassment, a sense of self-rejection, a sense of maybe not trusting yourself a little bit, that part of us. So in the past couple of days, I have been called to go into a fast. I've been called to go into a 3-day fast before the end of March. And during this time, as I've been diving deep into the book of Esther, we can read the word, and many times, no matter how many times we go over it, there's always a new lesson, a new revelation that's being presented to us. So it just so happened that for me, in this time, as I'm appreciating the story, and in the past, I really would focus on that one verse that would say, you were born, you were made, you were created for such a time as this. But this time around, what really resonated and came up to me was her action, and really looking at her character and what she claimed, what she what she presented, which is the entirety of who she was, not only in that moment as the queen and the wife of the king, but also just claiming that parts of her that were cast in the shadows, that part of her from her past that were unseen and pretty much unknown to a lot of the people for which she's exposed to and in a day-to-day basis at the time. So for me, what became evident in the message that I've gained was claiming that part of us, claiming that part of me. So for those who are new to the channel, this is a restoration of faith. Absolutely. It's faith-based, but it's also in perfect elevation. We're very transparent and very open about the imperfect elevation as we restore in faith, right? You get to get into the uncomfortable. You get to allow yourself to make mistakes. But most importantly, you get to nurture and you get to honor those versions of you that allowed you to get here where you are right now in this walk of faith and this restoration of faith. So just to go ahead and dive deep a little bit as to what I mean. So as I was appreciating the book of Esther and I'm going through all that, I'm realizing, there's a moment in time where she has to make a decision, which is the only way she was capable to extend that purity, that love that she has, and that salvation to those that are near and dear to her, right? Her people, her family, well, being her uncle, since she isn't orphaned, right? Um, was she had to make the decision that no matter if she ran the risk of being, put to death basically, because she was going to present herself to the king without being summoned. And that alone, that took a toll on her. She needed to break the laws. She needed to break what was normal, what was expected, what was in place, right? Already within the what was normal back then with with the lifestyle, right? And the place where she is, where she's residing. But not only that, not only did she need to do that with her flesh, with her body, and walk up to him and actually speak up, she also needed to own, she needed to claim basically, you know where she comes from, what her roots, what her past was, and really give the entirety of what she is, all of it, the completeness of what she is, which is really just declaring where God has delivered her from, and sharing that um with the king, and that took a lot. So for me, that really stuck with me, and it really made me realize that a lot of times we're being called and God tells us to speak up and speak from our trials. Yes, and we're very open, and we're quick to speak about all the trials that God has delivered us, but But God has given me this calling that we also get to speak about the things that He delivered from within us. That in this moment of time where we are, where we're elevating, where we're arising to claim the word and the promises that He has over our lives, the only way we can merge that is really honoring and claiming those parts of us, that part of our journey that we got to walk through, and they were really difficult. But most importantly, those are probably the parts of you that you're the most ashamed, the most embarrassed, the ones that you don't want no one to know about, the ones you don't want no one to ever find out about. Because just like Esther, when she appeared to the king without being summoned, she felt like that was it, right? Because the punishment, the law stated that she would have to be put to death as a punishment. So when we're being called, I feel like those that are resonating with this message of you're being called to speak as to what God has delivered you from the inside. You feel like even here in this channel, I was really resistant to deliver this message because I felt like a lot of the people that are tuning in, maybe they might be restoring their faith, right? They're going into the restoration of faith, but we also it's a privilege to talk about the imperfect elevation, because yes, a lot of people, maybe they started their path with God because they had a good role model and a good background, and they had that person that which introduced them to the church, and they were, just really soaking in the word and living in that living water. But a lot of us, right, the Gentiles, a lot of those, they're going through difficult times. They're surrounded by shadow. They're surrounded by death. They're surrounded by darkness. And it's really difficult to get that seed, that just that foundation to connect with God. So this is why I get to, even though I'm very resistant, and I feel like maybe a lot of you may feel triggered, maybe a lot of you might have a different mindset as to what I have to share here. And I was being very resistant because I was fearing that sense of rejection. But at the end of the day, I'm obedient and I'm a servant of God. So therefore, I'm allowing myself to share that part of us, just like Esther, with I get to share it. I get to say where God delivered me from that brokenness, that dark side of us, because it is part of me, and I get to honor her. Because that version of me, that version of you that got you to where you are right now and where you're heading to, served a purpose. It was necessary because it gave us a contrast. It gave us a contrast to allow ourselves to use the discernment of God, to know what aligned with us with God. And we only gain that knowledge and that wisdom of discernment through the exposure of our shadow, through the exposure of our darkness, through the exposure of that dark belief and all those bondages that we once had and God has delivered us from. We use that now to have such a power for an absolutely certain assurance as to what the discernment is. No, this doesn't serve me. Nope, I recognize this from, but you can only recognize it because you lived through it, because you experienced it. So what I want to share is, for example, yes, okay, you surrendered, you got on your knees, you went through that death, right? And just like in the book of Genesis, it tells us that Eve, the expression she gives is that she was deceived, right, by the serpent. There's a word for it, beguiled. She was beguiled, right? Eve states she was beguiled, she was deceived, she was confused, right, through the serpent. And now remember, Eve during that time, she wasn't even called Eve. She was always called the woman, the woman, the woman, the woman. So she didn't have an identity, a rooted establishment with God. So therefore she was easily beguiled, easily confused through the serpent, right? And mind you, when we look at the book of Genesis, these are people that are born, but they're like, in their 30s or something. I don't know exactly age, but they weren't children. So when we're going through our surrender and we're in that moment of our knees and in acceptance of what's gone on in our lives, accepting that hurt and that heartbreak and accepting and surrendering to God, that's when we're born again in the spirit, right? As I explained in the previous videos. So just like Eve and Adam at that time were adults, but in spirit, we're being born again, right? And we're being named again and we're filling in a new spirit, but we're still very immature, still very ignorant, right? Everything is still new within our spirit. We're still growing. So during that time, because remember, the enemy, his go-to, his key is to deceive us, to lie to us, to steal, to deceive, to kill, to confuse us. So what I get to share, what I'm being called to share with you guys is when I started that walk of path with God, when I went into surrender, I still carried, right? Even though I was reborn in spirit within my flesh, I still carried that conditioning of the sin. And remember, the sin is just a definition of the sin. It's just that you missed your mark as to how God sees you, what he created you to be, right? What he has called you to be, the purpose he has placed over your life. So we have lived this life of missing our mark, missing our purpose. So therefore in sin, not recognizing who we are. So at this time that we've just been born anew in spirit, yet we're still have those generational curses that we get to break and we get to work through, and yet we're being exposed to what we think is our path, because it is our path, and we're allowing ourselves the space, the mercy, the compassion to make mistakes so we can grow, because only by diving deep, again, we gain that discernment of knowing this doesn't align with us, but we only gain that by going through it. So I get to share that when I first started my path, I was very much aligned at the time of what I believed was, and it was because I was still in the sense of control. Even though I surrendered, I still was doing like the brake and the gas pedal at the same time, you know, when you first get in a car. And that's how the walk of faith pretty much is. That's a perfect analogy or a metaphor. So yes, you're pressing on the gas brake because, I mean, on the gas pedal, because you're surrendering to God. But every so often your fear, this is new, this is dangerous, this is kind of fast, this is, you know, it's your life is at risk. So you kind of hit the brakes every so often to your own limitations. And that's what your flesh, that's what your sin does within you. And that's what the enemy still uses, because it wants to bring you back to a place of darkness. So as I was going through that path, I first came introduced and I was really connecting with tarot reading. And again, just like Esther, it's just like that part of you that you're so scared because you feel like you're going to be, you know, put to death for. So I'm being transparent here, and I don't get to judge that part of me, but I get to honor her and acknowledge I did do that. I did the gas and the brake, and that was one of the things I did. But the more I was exposed to that, God revealed to me that it was coming from a place of victim mentality. It was a place of being holding on to the past, holding on to that hurt, to that pain, and still identifying myself with that sin, with that missed mark, you know, that somehow I'm not good enough. And yet, you know, the false sense I was getting that with the tarot reading was that it was giving me a sense of relief, of assurance, because I was in the know. Again, it's just a false sense of control. And it wasn't the surrender, which later on, the more I exposed myself, I was able to discern, because I realized it was just leaving me more depleted, more empty, and not in fullness, because it just kept picking at my wound, picking at my past, picking at that version of me, of that false identity, that false label that I was carrying for so long, that some way, somehow it wasn't good enough, right? And in this imperfect elevation, as I continued, and then I was able to discern that wasn't serving me, then I had moved on to what was it, astrology and numerology and stuff like that. And that actually, what was doing was giving me the sense of having faith for something outside of me, and belief for something outside of me, and some sort of clarity and comfort. But what I realized time and time again, that even though I've received those and it gave me a sense of understanding myself better, reading my body more, observing, learning how to really observe my energy, my flesh, really observe my thoughts. Where do they go? Where is the focus place? It really helped me do empathetic listening and understanding what really belonged to me and what didn't. God used that during that time, because remember, God uses everything, everything, even the thing that you're most ashamed of, right? Whether it was sexual assault, divorce, separation, a death of a family member, you lost a job, that, that your business went bankrupt. Everything God uses for his kingdom, right? So even though I was with that, walking through that confusion of gas and brake, he was still walking with me. He was still allowing, as the faithful, loving father that he is, even though I was making a mistake, a sloppy mistake of something that was new to me in spirit, because I was very immature, very ignorant. And let's just be clear, the person I am today, 4 or 5 years from now, I'm going to have a totally new, deeper understanding and a different view of the world and beliefs and values than I have right now. So we get to be comfortable with the fact that we continue to evolve and we continue to grow as he continued to nourish us, right? Just like we're his garden, right? He establishes back to a garden. We're his garden. So he plants the seed, the mustard seed, and he allows it to grow with his pace of grace. And that's how loving he is with us. So he understands, and he allows us the breathing room to make those mistakes. And as I continue to make those mistakes, um it brought me back to a place of darkness. And what I realized is that time and time again, whether it was crystals or whether it was any of those things that were not serving for me to align me with God, but at the moment it was giving me this sense of control, this sense of doing. It made me realize that every single time I went back to my knees, every single time I went back to God, every single time, that sense, that deliverance came through with that comfort of him wrapping himself around me. Once I thought, once I grabbed, once I did, once I followed, once I beguiled, right? I was deceived, because the way the enemy deceives you is he uses a little bit of truth to twist it, to keep you trapped, right? In that rat race, in that hamster wheel, in that break and go motion. And you're always feeling incomplete. You're always feeling like there's something missing. You're always feeling like you need to reach, you need to take another course, you need to just learn this one more thing. If only you had that, if only the money, and all these things that you're worshiping in the sense without even knowing outside of you, that's not from God. And it keeps you trapped, just like he did with Eve, right? He said, well, God said this, but not necessarily that, right? So he used a little bit of the truth to beguile Eve, to confuse Eve, to deceive Eve. And we walked through that path too. And after the fact, she was named. So just like us, in our journey back from the death to the darkness, to the shadow, to the wilderness, right? Back to the garden, and our process of elevation, it's imperfect. And we get to acknowledge that. And it's so important to give yourself grace. And I can honestly say I'm so grateful that I got the opportunity to make those mistakes, to get into that season of confusion, because now it only served as pure absolute certainty of my faith with God. It served for me to know, even a half a mile away, that nope, that's a deceivement, that's not from God, that's false, that's a trap. That's just something that's going to drain you. It's not aligned from you. It's not for your path. It doesn't serve you nor those that are around you. But I wouldn't know what I know now if I didn't gain the experience. And I won't gain the experience until you walk through it. And I don't get to help people unless I acknowledge that. I don't get to crucify myself. I don't get to judge that part of me. I don't get to just eliminate it and sweep it under the rug and pretend it never existed. Right? Because Esther got to save her people, got to use her voice, got to set herself free with her king when she allowed herself to acknowledge, you know what, this might be where They put me to death because I'm breaking the laws, but I get to claim it. And she went into a fast, and then the prayers came through. And I don't know, that's what came to me, was the understanding that I am delivered, yes, from all the fleshy stuff, right? But also from all the sin, the mental. We only get the sound mind when we acknowledge that. And we don't get to crucify it, and we get to serve others better. Because who are we as Christians if we falsely say, oh, you repented, you go on the Bible, and that's it? There's a process. There's a process of cleanse, rinse, and repeat. There's a process of pouring in the living water to take out that dirty, that muckiness, that death that was within us. So at one point, the point of transitioning, which is what this channel is about, it gets very confusing. It gets very gas and brake pedal at the same time. And you don't get to be ashamed of it, because it serves you to get you here. And God uses that for the next person, because he wants you with your nothingness. He just wants you, just you and your heart and your nothingness. And I walk through that path when I had those experiences, right? It just made me realize time and time again how really detached and empty and made me feel, how very hopeless and just dependable of something else I was, something outside of me. And then it just became more and more and more evident that the fulfillment, the joy, that feeling of jubilee, that liberation and freedom of your soul, and the completeness came when you claim who you are in Christ. You're his bride. You're his beloved. He just wants you. You're his garden, right? He describes us as his garden. I was reading this book from one of my pastors. It's The Timeless, a commentary of the Song of Solomon Treasure. And on there, it describes to us the garden for which he sees us. It says, let me see if I find that. I just read it. Anyways, he describes us as his garden with pomegranate. I believe it was pomegranate, myrrh, frankincense, and also the plants, which in Hebrew means, if I recall this correctly, it means weapons. And he established all of that. But just like a garden, it takes time, it takes nurturing, it takes, focus, dedication, intimacy with your garden. And it'll flourish, right? It starts from a patch of dirt into this flourishing, beautiful site. And that's how he sees us. And that's one of the things, like I've been reading through this fast that I've been doing, that I've been led to do. I hope this really touches you or a loved one, to just say, always surrender to God and know that he has a purpose. If you have a family member that maybe might be going through that walk, and understand that we don't get that sense, because just like with the tarot cards and all that stuff, you're trying to gain a sense of control of, tarot people. The reason why you're doing it is because you're trying to figure out what the other person is thinking. You're trying to figure out what, your focus is still not on you. Your focus is still not on God. So it's a sense of control. Is he going to come back, or is this situation going to come back, or am I going to gain this finances? And it's still a sense of worshiping something outside of you, money, abundance, all this stuff outside of you. But what about you? And now that I'm here, now that I'm past that, right? I'm so grateful for all it served me. And that part of me, I don't get to hide. I don't get to block out. But I get to honor it, because now I know with absolute certainty and faith that my God is it, right? He's everything. But it helps you to understand that you get to release. That's not your child. That's God's child. That's not your mom. That's God's child. That's not your partner. That's God's child, right? That's God's beloved. and he will guide them and walk with them, and it'll be in God's timing. And because you have this absolute faith, this absolute belief, you know that if the same way he did it for you, he will do it for them. The same way he left the 99 for you, he will do it for them, no matter where they are in their walk in life. And every single walk serves you, right? When you went through a toxic relationship, it serves you to identify what a healthy one looks like, right? So when you went through, a job that was very consuming, you know what a healthy job feels like. When you know the way you want to be touched, because they touched you the wrong way, they physically abused you or some sense. Now you know what kind touch, what soft touch is, and what you will allow. So the same now you're doing with your spirit. You put yourself through something that, just like in any relationship, you do find some truth and some nuggets, but then you realize that overall it just left you more broken. And once you gain that, then you can recognize true, authentic love, pure love, never ending love, unending love, eternal love, unconditional love. And that's all found through our Lord and Savior. All right, guys, until next time, thank you so much for being here. If you're looking for a prayer, please just send your prayer request through the email link, email information attached below in the description box. And if you would like to sow into this channel and just support, my mission here for us all, for our family, just feel free to find one of the options below in the description box. And until next time, also, you can feel free, right, to like, share, and subscribe or comment. Until next time, guys. Bye.